My name is Dr. Gary Phillips, and I am a uh, medically retired chiropractic physician and registered nurse and former professor of nutrition and wellness. And the reason why I'm actually, uh, the reason why I medically retired was because of a rare blood disorder that I've had for 29 years that has literally um, triggered by a virus, like a cold or flu virus. When that happens in this particular disorder, it ramps up my immune system to start destroying my platelets. The platelets are the little blood cells that prevent bleeding by clotting. And when the platelet count goes below, a certain level, you can be at risk for bleeding to death. And this is a disorder that actually happens in three different populations, none of which I am a part of: pregnant women, adult females, and um, children under one. And I was diagnosed in 1993 while I was in private practice um, with as an adult male in between 25 and 30 years old. So each time this happens, beginning in 1993, um, I was kicked in karate. I bruised from my wrist to my shoulder, and we thought, my wife and I are both, healthcare professionals. We thought it was leukemia. I had a bone marrow biopsy. It was determined that I had this condition, which is a very long, ugly name: chronic refractory immune variant thrombocytopenic purpura, which means no known cause for low platelet count causing bruising mediated by the immune system. So what they do for this is initially they removed my spleen. They put you on high dose steroids, corticosteroids, prednisone. In the emergency room, they give you IV steroids. And then when you're discharged home, they give you 6 days of oral steroids. Steroids, if you don't know, and many people don't, they are extremely toxic over a long period of time. They're in the short term, doctors prescribe steroids, corticosteroids, for people with brain cancer to reduce inflammation, people with asthma or pneumonia to reduce inflammation in the lungs. In my case, the steroids are there to ramp my immune system down and reduce the destruction of my platelets and save my life. They also do platelet transfusions if you're bleeding actively. I have, short story long, I have been in the emergency room and had 6 days of steroid rescue after emergency room visits 83 times, near death. And I'm still here talking to you by the grace of God. Um, Over the years, those steroids, many of the side effects, I've had all the side effects. One of the major side effects is diabetes. So over the years, in addition to weakening bone and connective tissue, putting you at risk for fractures and disc injuries, and anything that's connective tissue like cartilage and ligaments, all became weakened. And I was very athletic and very healthy my whole life. Worked 12 to 14 hours a day as a doctor and a nurse and hospice director. And throughout my entire career, I just dealt with this. Cold or flu came in, emergency room, 6 days of steroids, back to work. So long story short, in 2016, when I retired, which was about 7 years ago, almost, my hemoglobin A1C, which is a risk factor for diabetes, it measures the sweetness of your hemoglobin in your blood. In diabetics, or in normal people, it's like 4.6 to 5.6 level. In diabetics, it's typically above it's above 6.6, 6.7. If your hemoglobin A1C, along with blood sugars and the other things that they use to diagnose diabetes, mainly those two things: blood sugar that becomes out of control above the normal level, and hemoglobin A1C, you're diagnosed with diabetes. So if it's below that, there's a pre-diabetic condition. When you're above the high normal, 5.6, and between 5.6 and 6.6, I got as high as 6.3. And so it was obvious that the steroids over the long term had created a pre-diabetic condition for me. So I've always been healthy, diet controlled, exercise controlled, extremely, nutritionally sound. Uh, what I did when my father-in-law, and I brought the Synachroma, and I'll tell you about that. And I brought my father-in-law Oswaldo. Can you see the Nervala right there? Can you see the
Yes.
Nervala?
Yep.
My father-in-law Oswaldo. This is how I found Barton, to answer your question in a not too short way. Um, my father-in-law is 90, widowed, and we take care of him. He lives close by, and he's a diabetic. And he was diagnosed with diabetes like 20 years ago, nutrition controlled, probably the most compliant diabetic that you'll ever meet, regimented militaristically about his nutrition when he was given the diagnosis of diabetes. What the diabetes did do is it eliminated the vision in his left eye from diabetic retinopathy, which is blood vessel disease due to diabetes that caused blindness in his left eye. The other things that it did for him that he was afflicted with because of the diabetes was diabetic neuropathy. So neuropathy is the effect of long-term high blood sugars on the nerves, and it causes inflammation to the nerves. It causes the nerves to become less sensitive. You have hot and cold, pins and needles in your extremities. Everybody's different. It causes kidney disease, diabetic kidney disease. But in his case, he was having numbness and tingling, Leslie, in his feet. And this was getting progressively worse. Flash forward 6 to 8 months ago, he's very intelligent. He's a former chemistry professor, journalist, soccer player, very bright man. When he was introduced to the internet, when we introduced him to the internet, he's communicating with the family in Ecuador, researching everything, WebMD, everything. So he tells me, he tells his son-in-law, doctor, and my wife, his daughter, is a nurse practitioner. So he tells us about, the symptoms related to the conditions that we need to worry about. So he's a charismatic guy like that, but very regimented. So he did his homework and he said, "Hey, Gary, have you heard of alpha lipoic acid?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "I was told, I've been doing my homework, and that alpha lipoic acid that's found in several supplements, including Barton Nutrition Nervala, helps with diabetic neuropathy." He goes, "Do you know anything about that?" And I said, "I know a lot about that. What have you learned, and what would you be interested in doing?" He goes, "Well, I checked on Amazon, and I checked on, the internet, and I found a couple of supplements. One was a generic neuropathy supplement from another company that had alpha lipoic acid in it. He was going to try that, but he said, would you look at these two companies that I found?" He did. "And would you tell me what you think, as his son-in-law, the nutrition professor, doctor, nurse guy." So I said, "Sure." So I checked it out. I went on to Barton's website. I looked at Nervala. I looked at the other supplements. Meanwhile, at the same time, I'm pre-diabetic, so I didn't know that, Synachroma was. Can you see that? I didn't know Synachroma was in the Barton, toolbox. So he started on. We got him set up with Nervala, and at the same time, I set him up with. We did an auto ship, and then I discovered that Synachroma is also helpful for, blood glucose metabolism, and I wanted to see if it would work on my hemoglobin A1C. So we started about the same time, about 8 months ago, 6 months ago, 8 months ago. So we got auto ship with Synachroma and a Nervala every month. His symptoms began to go away just literally a month ago. And after about 5-6 months of being on Nervala, no more pins and needles, no more numbness and tingling, praise God, in his feet. And he's like, "I want to make an appointment with my primary care doctor, and I want to ask if I could, I believe the normal dose is like 1 to 2 a day of Nervala. And Nervala has 600 milligrams of alpha lipoic acid and another ingredient both all helpful for diabetic neuropathy. So I said, well, let's make an appointment with Dr. your primary care doc and see if you can up the dose. He's like, I'd like to take 2, like they recommend. So I'm like, okay, sure. Went to the doctor 2 weeks ago. Hemoglobin A1C for him, actually, his symptoms went away. And I had recommended that he go on Synochroma, but his A1C has been very stable and not problematic, and he's diet controlled diabetic. He doesn't have to take metformin, he doesn't have to take insulin, doesn't have to take glipizide, and none of the diabetic medications. He's been diet controlled from the beginning and doesn't have a weight issue. He's slender, slender little guy. So the doctor said, sure, I endorse the alpha lipoic acid in your Nervala, and I'm recommending that if it's helping you now, take 2 a day. Called up Barton, I called up Nick, and he helped us way back at the beginning. I said, Nick, I'd like to boost up, but he's also a very frugal negotiating businessman. So he said, look, I found some offers online for 60 count bottles of alpha lipoic acid, and I'd like to make a deal with Barton. I'm like, okay, whatever you want, Poppy, no problem. So long story short, we negotiated a 2 bottle in addition to my Synochroma, and he's going to start taking 2 a day, and his doctor's all on board. He's so happy. He's so happy. So on his behalf, Oswaldo, my father-in-law, he's just thrilled that not only did they work with him because he's on a fixed budget, he's elderly, they worked with his financials on the per bottle cost, 2 bottles instead of 1, auto ship. And for me, it wasn't the money that I was concerned about, but my hemoglobin A1C went from 6.3 to 6.0 in the same period of time. So the only thing, barring any change in my nutritional regimen, and I only take supplements, so I don't take any really prescribed medication other than my treatment every week to keep me alive. So I'm nutrition and exercise and mindfulness controlled and very healthy, and the Synochroma has definitely made a difference. And I'm not someone that doesn't know what I'm talking about. I actually have 40 years of experience. I've been a nutrition professor with the University of Phoenix, teaching undergraduates and graduates and nurse practitioner students. So I know the difference. I practice what I preach. I've always, researched everything. And what Joe has done is phenomenal. I applaud Joe and the team's efforts. I love the little guitar string thing story on the website. I saw that the other day, describing his life, and I stand behind, healthy, organically sourced, well-prepared supplements. Cinnamon bark, I have cinnamon every day. I knew that cinnamon was helpful with blood glucose metabolism and control. Cinnamon bark is one of the ingredients. Vanadium is another precious metal. It's a mineral that's very helpful in blood glucose metabolism. That's in here. Chromium picolinate. Chromium picolinate has been long known to be a helpful ingredient in blood glucose metabolism. Selenium, same. Vitamin K2, I'm sure that in D3, cholecalciferol, helpful in bone strength and also immunity. And I take that by itself every day, 5,000 IUs. So I just wanted to say thank you. And that it's helped us, and I know it's helped many other people, and I want to get the word out. I'm very active in the community with education, and so that's my story.